Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to episode 84 of the Next Block. How you doing, Crypto for Change?
I'm doing good. See, Will doing good. Obviously excited to talk about some hashtag real world assets that we have in the crypto world. I know everything is, usually just the digital side, but this is the digital that's linked to the physical world. And so, it's going to be an exciting episode. Lofty AI is our guest, and we have the creator of it, Jerry Chu, coming on. And, it's going to be exciting because, the real estate, tokenized real estate was one of the things when I first got into crypto that I was like, holy cow, that's going to be a massive industry, once this technology can allow it. And that's why one of the reasons why I was super excited about Algorand. I was an early user of Lofty AI, even made some videos way back on my own
Yep.
channel when I first got started. So excited to have them on and talk about, some tokenized real estate. How are you doing?
Same here. Yeah, I'm great. Lofty, again, one of my favorite projects, definitely early on, and is still here today, growing, and I'm very excited. Let's bring Jerry Chu on the show.
Let's do it.
How's it going, Jerry?
Hey guys, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on.
Yes, excellent. So, for the audience who don't know who you are, can you give like an origin story or overview of yourself and Lofty AI?
Sure, yeah. Origin story on myself, pretty straightforward. Grow up, I was a pretty quantitatively gifted child, I would I would say. I always liked math, sciences, things like that.
Yep.
So at a very young age, I kind of decided I wanted to be work in like as quant trader on Wall Street or something one day. So I kind of scheduled my studies and things in that regards and study math for my bachelor's, and then I got a master's in financial engineering. But when I had the opportunity to go work on Wall Street, I quickly realized the industry wasn't the way like the movies and kind of made it out to
Yeah.
be, and like wasn't quite the way I imagined it to be.
So
And I just
how
realized
close to Wolf of Wall Street's was it?
not anymore. Honestly, from some of the stories, the higher ups and the people that have been there longer told me it actually used to be like that back in the 80s
Yeah.
and 90s. But
Quaaludes?
after yeah, probably. But after 2000s, 2008, after the last Great Recession, a lot of new regulations were introduced, and banks and a lot of these trading firms, especially with prop trading, just completely shifted in how they did business and what they actually did. So it's completely night and day. And so, I also realized that I'm probably like a big corporate career just wasn't really a good fit for me either. I didn't really like the bureaucracy
Yeah.
that seeps into these, workplaces. And so I realized, hey, maybe I should kind of pivot. I don't really see myself doing this for the rest of my life. I was always really interested in technology. So I decided to teach myself how to code, and then sort of pivot and go be a software engineer. So I ended up working at another small startup here in Los Angeles where I met my co-founder Max. And I always wanted to start something myself. So one day I was in the office, kind of thinking about like, hey, there's this pitch deck I'm working on. This is a company I want to start. And Max looked over and we started chatting about it. And he ended up getting really excited. And as did I, obviously. And we just kind of talked about it for 4 hours. And as crazy as it sounds, the next week we both quit our jobs and ended up starting Lofty together.
Dang.
And
That's
Lofty
bold.
essentially, yeah, it was pretty crazy in hindsight. I don't recommend other people do it, but it kind of worked out for us. In hindsight, Lofty essentially the reason we wanted to start it was I was looking into investing in real estate myself, and just realized that it was such a painful process. And this happened to all the people I spoke to in my circle, friends, family, mentors, just people, younger, older, it doesn't matter. Universally, almost every single person, if you ask them a question like, hey, if you had the money, would you like to invest in some real estate one day?
Mhm.
Most people, if not 100% people, go like, yeah, sure. Like that seems like a good idea. That's what I should probably um, at least allocate a portion of my portfolio towards. And then you talk to people who've actually done it, and you ask them like, did you like the house you bought? Did you like the assets? Did you like the how it panned out for you? And most people would also say, yeah, it did really well. This is like one of the reasons why I'm doing well in life. But then if you ask people, did you enjoy the process? Every single person, doesn't matter how experienced they are, doesn't matter how well off they are and how much resources they have and people that work on their team, every single person comes back like, no, I hated like the process of buying real estate and selling real estate. And so that was kind of an aha moment for us. And we just thought, hey, is there a way to basically take everything that people already do, investing in houses and things like that, but just turn it into a process where it's a lot more painless and it's just 10 times more efficient than what it currently is. And that's kind of when we started looking into blockchain tokenization, because if you think about it, real estate transactions in the real world is for the most part peer to peer, right?
Yep.
And if you really think about it, what is the most efficient, best method of peer to peer transactions? And that's actually cash. Like I give you money in one hand, you
Yep.
give me the item in the other hand, and it settles immediately. And we don't need regulators, we don't need lawyers involved. Like we both got what we wanted, right?
Yep.
Now, if you go one step deeper, it's like, what is the technology system that best mimics that? And then you end up with a blockchain. And so that's kind of our thought process and how we ended up starting Lofty.
Yeah. So one thing, one thing that I really give you guys credit for that early on that just kind of wowed me and made me a really someone who really liked your all's platform is how affordable you made it for the average person, right? To be able to get some exposure. And I know there are REITs out there that people could dip their toes in and have exposure. But being most of your all's properties, I've even seen some that are right under $50, but $50 is the entry level to being able to own these tokenized portions of properties, and the benefit of seeing the appreciation obviously over the months accrue, and then also the daily rental payments. I thought that was just something super intuitive, and it was easy, and it's fulfilling, I would say, to I think our generation, right? We crave that like instant gratification, right? A lot of people maybe
Sure.
don't want to wait until the end of the month or to get that payment. They like seeing the daily drip and that constant appreciation of assets. So I think that's really cool. But I want to focus in also on, why did you guys choose Algorand? How did you hear about Algorand, and what was that process like? Just curious, because this was also at the beginning when Algorand was kind of launching. So this isn't, you guys aren't brand new. You guys have been around for a while. What made you choose Algorand over some of the other behemoths at the time, like the Ethereum, Solanas, and like?
Yeah. So I think it was Steve Jobs who said this the best. It's like when you build something new, you can't be thinking about it from the point of technology and then say, well, I'm going to build this, and then our users like it, and like would they use it, right? You have to think about it from the reverse side, which is what do the users want? And kind of like how I talked about earlier, it became very apparent that most of the people that we spoke to wanted to invest in real estate, but it was too expensive for them, and the process was just too annoying. And so even some of the people that did have the money just ended up not doing that, because their alternative is they could go on Robinhood or Coinbase and deploy a similar amount of capital in under 5 minutes and not have to deal with that process, right?
Yep.
And contrary to popular belief, a lot of people actually don't want real estate exposure, right? So what I mean by that is, people are smart enough to know that REITs exist, and you could just put some money into a REIT and just passively earn income and call it a day, right? So that instrument has been available for a very, very long time. But if you look at the overall market, just single family rental properties alone in the US is something like $1.5 trillion in terms of transactional volume on an annual basis. And a lot of people don't realize, but roughly like only about 30-ish% of that is actually from institutional activity. So like large funds, REITs, and open door, things like that that you hear in the news. The remaining, actually, the bulk of the volume comes from small mom and pop real estate investors, like couples that own a house near a university and they rent it out as student housing, things like that. They represent about 70% of the transactional volume. And so these people all know what a REIT is. So you have to ask yourself, like, why is it that despite there being this like REIT thing that exists and they could just do that, why so much money and like 70% of that market don't participate in it? So when we spoke to our users, it became pretty apparent that what they actually want is control. Like they don't just want to give someone money and just call it a day. It's like, oh, well, I know that money has exposure to real estate and they bought some real estate with it. What people really care about is, they drive around town, they drive around the city and they go like, oh, I really like this neighborhood. I think it'll do really well. Like, I really like that house in this neighborhood. I would like to buy that house, right? That's what people actually want, that sort of specific control over what they add into their portfolio and how they manage it. And so we knew from the get-go, in order to give people that control and what they actually want, you would need a very robust sort of governance program, where people who actually own the properties are in fact the owners and they control and manage it themselves. And it's also important that they own the assets, and those assets are there forever, and they own it forever until they choose to sell it. And so we wanted to find a blockchain that couldn't really soft fork, if that makes any sense. And so Algorand kind of fit that really well. And we were very fortunate in that, a lot of our, so one of our main engineers who's been with us for quite some time now, we didn't know this. We didn't hire him originally for blockchain development, but it turns out, when we got into this space, that he was like, oh, I actually was one of the contributors to the first open source Bitcoin wallet, like way back in the days, like 2013 or something like that. Yeah. I was like, oh, okay. And so
Even
he's
better.
apparently just on the side been keeping up with the industry developments and new chains and new technology that have come out. And he was the person that recommended Algorand because it fit. I listed out a couple of criteria for our team. I said, look, whatever we choose to build on has to be able to satisfy these things. And I talk about the governance and the forking aspect, and then the other aspect is transaction fees, right? It doesn't make sense to, for our use case, for someone who's collecting $1 in rent, for that to cost like $5 to send to them.
Yeah, it literally would be
Like, that's
impossible in my
exactly.
mind to use Ethereum, because even then you're thinking if you got to buy a $50 token, or you're putting $50 or even more, God forbid, like imagine having to pay, $15 of that or $10 of that in a fee. I mean, at that point, you literally would have to hold that property for X amount of time to even, for it to pay off for you. So yeah, it definitely wouldn't make
That's
sense.
definitely one of the drawbacks, the high fees. But the most important one I would actually say is, I told our team that if you want this to do well, you're going to need just people who don't understand blockchain to use this. Like, the blockchain is
Yep.
just the plumbing. It's like a data. It's basically the settlement layer on Lofty. That's it. That's all there is to it. And for most of our users, they're not going to understand what it is. They're not going to know what it is. And they need to have a good experience using the platform. They can't be scared. They can't have too many questions about it. And so one of the things we wanted to mimic was what people were already used to, which is when you go on Robinhood or any other sort of legacy Web2 traditional finance apps, when you click buttons, things go through pretty quickly with the
Yeah.
databases, right? And so people are just like, hey, I'm buying this thing. I click on it. Okay, it says I bought it. It's in my account. That took like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And so one of the things was transaction and settlement time, right? We played around with a lot of different blockchains, just sending funds back and forth. And it's just like, okay, I sent it, and then you just sit there, and it's like, okay, estimated wait time is like 10 minutes.
That's always the
for this to set up.
scariest part. Yeah,
Yeah.
just
Exactly.
waiting.
It's like your
Yeah.
money is out of your wallet, but you don't know if it got to the other side yet.
Yeah.
And so I was like, this absolutely cannot fly. Like, what is something that could mimic a legacy like Web2 database experience for people? And we played around with things, and again, Algorand just kind of ticked that box, and was like,
Yeah.
okay, if this blockchain, despite it being new and relatively unknown at that point, ticks all the boxes, then obviously we would want to use it, because again, our selling point isn't we're on the blockchain and we're using this one specifically. Most of our users don't care and don't know about it in the first place. So for our use case, it was very much of, hey, we need all these things. Which blockchain checks all those boxes? And
Yeah.
Algorand ended up being the one.
Yeah, I'll say it's very smart that like this generation, as we talking about, a lot of us are Robinhood investors. So it does make sense of like, if we want something to gain and appreciate, you can easily buy a stock. But when it does come to real estate, it is a lot more confusion, and it makes a lot of sense. Can you break down how, it works in terms of like we buy it, all the requirements for the people who don't know? Do you need a wallet? Is it custodial? Things of that nature?
Yeah, great question. So we try to design the process to be as simple and straightforward as possible. So the important thing to understand about Lofty, like I said before, is that this is not a REIT, this is not a managed fund, right? You are just like what we're building is just mimicking the existing real estate market of people going out, finding their own houses that they want to buy and invest in with friends and family. What we do is just that we make it more accessible. And we also build the technology so that it's more efficient for you to do transactions, buy and sell, things like that. And so essentially what's happening is anyone can come to Lofty, we're a marketplace, and list a property for sale, right? But instead of the traditional way, where it's one seller to one buyer, we allow someone to basically tokenize the property, fractionalize equity in it, and sell to many buyers instead. And so when you're buying something on Lofty, you're not actually buying anything from us. So that's really important. We never own any assets on the platform. Instead, it's peer-to-peer transaction. You're buying it from just another person. Like, it could be someone that is just selling the ownership after they bought it on Lofty, right? So there's no lockup periods. You can invest in a portfolio, and then a year later, if you're like, hey, I'm going to liquidate some of this property, you can choose to do that on our secondary market. And so someone new coming in could be buying directly from that person, or it could be a brand new listing on the property, and you're buying it directly from the seller of the house, right? So that's kind of how the platform works. And just like traditionally, you wouldn't really just give all your money to buy a house without looking at it and without really kind of doing your own diligence on the property. We provide you with all the same information you would typically require. So for every property, there is a Dropbox folder attached to it. And it basically shows you like the lease. Obviously, we redact the name of the tenant, if there's a renter already, and their social security number, things like that. But you get to see that this is like a legitimate lease, like it's signed. Here's the monthly rental amount. So you don't need to take our word for it. You also get to see inspection reports, right? So you get to look at the property, like are there any issues, foundation problems, things like that. And if there are, you're going to have to decide, is that a risk I'm willing to take, right? Like, because sometimes if you're doing secondhand homes that are 56 years old, a lot of times they aren't going to be perfect. There's going to be like, oh, well, this thing, like this water, heater might not work anymore after like 5 more years because it's really old, right? Like, so these things would be surfaced up. And so it's up to the users to decide if they're okay with that. And then there's also an appraisal report. So basically, it's not perfect, but kind of gives user an idea of like, hey, what would potentially be the fair market value of this property if it were to go up for sale on the market today, right? And then that gives you an idea of, does it make sense? Do I want to invest in this property? Because a seller, just like in the normal real estate market, gets to list at whatever price they want to, right?
Yeah.
And so it's up to the buyers to look at that report and say, well, do I think they're listing it too high, too low, whatever is the case. You kind of make your own decisions. And
What I
then once
like,
you make a decision, oh yeah, sorry. Once you make the decision, it becomes really easy. You literally just click a button that says buy. You don't need your own wallet. Every account that is made on Lofty comes with its own Algorand wallet attached to it. And it's actually not a custodial wallet, so we never custody user funds. We just build an interface where like a person who doesn't understand blockchain and wallets can just use our application and interact with that wallet, right?
Yeah, they
Like
don't have to worry
obtain
about
the
the seed
stuff.
phrase and all
Yeah,
that stuff.
yeah, exactly. So we just like build tools to help you efficiently handle that, but we still don't custody funds for you. So you don't need to bring your own wallet on Lofty, and then you do have to pass KYC because it's not really legal for you to anonymously own real estate. At some
Right,
point, you can
right.
own it with a
yeah, that
under
would
an
be dope though.
entity, but then someone needs to own the entity. So eventually, no matter what, um, you're going to have to KYC. So that's pretty much it. But once you make the decision, like, hey, this works for me, this is what I want to do, the process takes less than 5 minutes. You literally click on a buy button and a sell button, determine the price that you want to buy and sell at, and then if there's a matching order, transaction will go through. And congrats, you just became an owner in a property. Direct
Yeah,
ownership, right?
yeah.
Again, not exposure in someone else's fund. Like you own a portion of that house and you get to make decisions on how to manage that house moving forward.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, I
awesome.
would say I want to just add, I like what y'all do on the platform is that the education pieces is there. So when I
Mm.
was early, on your site, I was showing my friends and family who was interested. It's like you can literally go in here and learn about real estate, the whole process, go look at all the documentations, and then make an educated decision. And I think that's very powerful of y'all. I know you got a question, David.
Yeah, I was just going to say, bring up their website real quick. I just want to go over, some of the keynotes that you guys posted back in, I think it's September. So, pull up their marketplace. Obviously, I'm sure you guys have done a little bit more since, this article came out. But so far, you guys have tokenized 148 properties to date across 11 U.S. states. Like I said, could be more. I know you guys recently tokenized a property also outside of the United States in Mexico, which I think is pretty cool. The highest valued Lofty portfolio is over 2 million. And like obviously it's just $50 to get in. You guys have about 230 average buyers on homes, 7,000 monthly active users, and so far, like I said, this was September, so numbers are probably a little higher. But you guys have generated $2 million in rental income for your users to date. So as you guys can see, if you're watching in the live show, this is what their marketplace looks like. It makes it super simple to see projected yield that you would get and rental yield as well. And it gives you obviously if you were to click on a property, you can click on one. See, Will, let's just showcase how much detail they give here. It really does go in depth on obviously starting price, like I say, your projected return, but as you go down even more with pictures as well as a good history
It
of the
shows you the
home.
actual returns, by the way, not the projected ones. Once you click into a
Yeah.
property.
Yeah,
Yeah.
annual. Yep.
So it's like if a property has no tenant or they're delinquent and not paying rent, it will actually show 0.
Okay.
That's good to
Yeah.
Oh,
see.
rental yield here. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Okay,
zero.
Yeah.
makes
That's why
sense.
it's showing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it'll actually show you that like we don't mislead our users. Like we want to make sure you have all the relevant information you would normally have if you were to go out and buy your own house.
Yeah, and you guys have also go back to the main page. You guys have also started tokenizing Airbnb properties as well, and I also think there was the one. Even what was the one in Mexico? Was that one a Airbnb property as well, or what was that one?
No, that one's a little unique. So that one's actually a hotel development.
Okay.
And what you
Wow.
can do is you can
This
own
one.
units within the hotel and then obviously use it yourself
Oh wow.
just to live
Wait,
there
wait.
full
Use it
time if you wanted
yourself?
to.
Can you
Yeah, you
break
can
that
use it
part?
yourself. You can live in there if you wanted to. But what you can also
That's
do
dope.
alternatively is you can basically lease that unit to the hotel management group. And then they would basically rent out the rooms to people that book rooms at the hotel, and then they would share a portion of the revenue for you, so you can earn rental income that
Oh
Yeah,
wow.
that's pretty sick.
Yeah, that's a big one.
As we're talking about your all's platform here and showcasing some of it, what are your highlights that you're excited about with what Lofty's done? And I know you guys also have a really cool tool coming out with the AMM liquidity pools for these properties. Tell us a little bit about what you're excited about with Lofty now and where you guys are at and where you're looking to move forward.
Yeah, so I think one of the things where we've been, so let's talk about the past a little bit first. So this year, one of the most exciting features we launched was the ability basically create more flexibility for different type of structures on the platform. So we don't really advertise this. A lot of you may not know about it, but they're actually lending DAOs on the platform, right? So basically, when you become an owner of a property along with these other owners, what you're doing is you're becoming a part of a DAO, right? And this DAO is managing the property together. And sometimes, a property needs maintenance and repairs and things like that, and there's not enough funds currently to cover it. And so we've had situations where like groups of people would lend money to these DAOs, right? And DAOs would lend money to other DAOs for repairs in exchange for interest, so like peer-to-peer loans. So that's been really interesting and exciting to see how it's developed. It's not really a core part of our product. Think of it more like we're monitoring it. It's like an alpha thing, but potentially we could extend that loan product and sort of make it more available mass market. And then the other thing we're really excited about is as a seller, you can now sell. So before you would have to sell 100% of the property. It was all or nothing. But now we're allowing people to sell a portion of the equity in their property. right? And so if you own a property, but you want some liquidity out, maybe to invest in another property or whatever happens in life you want to take care of, we're allowing people to essentially sell a portion of that equity, become co-owners with the new investors, and then collectively managing that property together. And that's allowed for some pretty interesting things, which
Wow.
is some of these properties now have debt built in. So before they were 100% cash deals, but now because some of these sellers have mortgages already on their properties, people are sort of benefiting from that built-in leverage, which is one of the things that's made real estate very attractive for a lot of professional investors, is your ability to leverage up. There's not a whole lot of assets where you can leverage up like 4-to-1 at that sort of insane ratio, right? Real estate is one
Yeah.
of the only assets where you can consistently do that. And so we're now seeing what's really unique is that traditionally for real estate, yield and risk goes hand in hand. They're correlated. And so if you want a higher yield on your investment, you're taking on higher risk by investing in neighborhoods that aren't the safest, aren't the best, and you're more likely to see problems with the property. But in exchange, if things go well, your yield is a lot higher, right? And then in much safer neighborhoods with good schools and things like the places that everybody wants to live in, the yield is actually always very, very low. And that is a reflection of that. This is very stable. You get a low yield, but the person's probably always going to pay on time because you're
Yeah.
probably renting it out to like a doctor or a lawyer, and they're
Right,
just
right.
not going to be delinquent ever. So there's that correlation. But leverage allows you to kind of, it does add some risk, but kind of allows you the best of both worlds, where now we're able to launch properties that are in much better neighborhoods, much
Yeah.
more secure in terms of cash flow and consistency, but the yield is actually very high because the property's leveraged up, right? And so that's been really unique to see. And because of the we call it partial tokenization feature that's been released, we now have sellers, doing very unique structures. So we actually have one coming up fairly soon. That'll be interesting to see if people like it or not. It's actually a HELOC structure. So the person is
I'll
just
say, Jerry,
essentially doing a HELOC in their house, and they're still living in it, and they'll just be paying a monthly interest to our users on the platform. So all of these things have become possible over the last year. That's what we've been really excited about.
That's crazy. And
yeah, I would say we have to take a quick ad break. Sorry to stop here. I want to continue that conversation because I think it's very important. But if you can give us a moment here. Thank you, everyone. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Episode 84 with Jerry Chu. We're talking about tokenized real estate. Jerry, I do want
Yeah.
to pass this back to you and go into that HELOC conversation.
I want to add something
Sure.
too right before you jump into that. It's just interesting because from, my history before, I started this show and really got into crypto, I was in banking for 7 years. So I was, doing home equity applications, second
Mhm.
mortgages, stuff like that for customers. And so it's interesting to see, what you guys are able to do. And I'd also like to know how, what does the regulatory side of that look like? And like, how are you guys actually what banks or who are you guys working with, I guess, to actually enable that and make it seamless for the other side, right? So we've kind of seen the side of the user, but how is it for the person who owns the property? And what does that look like from a higher, you don't have to go too in depth because I know it can get kind of hairy, but what's it look like from a sky view?
Yeah, I mean, right now this is very much a niche product, so there's no really banks or any third parties involved. It's really just the seller and the buyer that's involved. Again, we specialize and focus on peer-to-peer transactions, right?
Nice.
And that's also part of that regulatory conversation, which is, typically as the laws are currently written, um, peer-to-peer transactions are okay in like most, like 99% of situations, right? It's usually when you introduce a third party that has
Mhm.
management power, that is an intermediary, that custody funds for people. That's when you start running into regulatory, concerns and things like that. But because all those things don't exist with our structures and how things are done on Lofty, we're not concerned too much about that. And so with the HELOCs, I just call it a HELOC, but it's not really exactly structured like a HELOC loan. What's actually happening is the seller owns their house 100% outright. There's no mortgage on it.
Okay.
And they're just selling a portion of their
Mm.
house to other people. And they're going to buy back that equity at a future date at a pre agreed on price.
Uh,
So that's the duration and the term. And then in the meantime, they're going to pay essentially monthly rental income for basically they're like, it's like a lease back. They're renting their property still until they buy back the rest of the equity. And then in exchange, once they sell that portion of equity, they get cash that they can then use to do, um, whatever they want. So that's kind of how it's structured. And we can only do HELOCs in this regard. We don't actually do loans with banks or anything like that.
I really like that too. Your peer to peer is the real ethos of crypto and Bitcoin. So this is a very powerful thing there. I'm like,
Let's let's jump into the liquidity pools and the AMM that you guys got coming on. I know right now it's in the
Sure.
closed beta and you guys are testing that. So talk to a little bit about what that will add to Lofty among the people who are holding the tokens of these properties and for future people who are looking to get in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So, one of the things we're really proud of is that at Lofty, it's pretty much the only fractional real estate platform where there's no lockup period. So if you buy something, it's yours, you bought it, you own it. And just like with traditional real estate, if you bought a house today, you can sell it tomorrow if you wanted to. No one comes and tells you that that's illegal or you can't do it or like, restrictions, things like that. And so we mimic again just what people are already used to in the industry. So if you buy a token today, you can try to sell it tomorrow. There's no lockup period. But just like a healthy free market, it's based on supply and demand. So just because you want to sell it tomorrow doesn't mean that people want to buy it tomorrow, or it doesn't mean that people want to buy it at the price you're choosing to sell at, right? And again, that's just sort of a function of the free market. And so that's worked out pretty well for the most part. But obviously, when you kind of try to get people to price things on their own, there's sort of a paralysis that kind of happens with a lot of users. Like they don't quite know what to price it at, they're not sure, and they just end up not doing anything, and that's not a good user experience, right? It's kind of like for most people that buy stocks, like a share of Apple, they just see a market price and then they just decide, hey,
Mhm.
I'm okay or I'm not okay with that price. And if they're okay with it, they buy it. And if they're not, they don't buy anything, right? But imagine taking that market price away and then telling people, oh, everyone go read Apple's annual reports and decide how much a share of Apple is worth and price it like that yourselves. You're going to get some weird, wonky pricing and a lot of weird situations that kind of come up. So that's kind of like the state of our secondary market. And so to improve it further, we want to bring that experience that I just talked about to everyday people, which is just having a market price for these properties. And again, it's going to fluctuate. It's going to be based on supply and demand, but at least you get to see a spot market price and just decide like, that's the price. If I choose to accept that price, I know my trade will go through instantly, right? And so that's basically what we're doing here. So we're launching a set of AMMs and liquidity pools. So decentralized capital, there's no market maker that is centralized. We're not doing it. There's no other capital providers. It's completely, again, peer-to-peer. So people can actually lend essentially liquidity to the market maker, which is an algorithm in this case. And it's constantly buying and selling tokens in the property. And by doing that, it is able to, based on the math, generate a market price for that property. And then for all of our users, they can then come to that property and say, hey, it's listed at X dollars if I want to buy it or if I want to sell it, and I'm okay with that price. I can just click a button. And unlike traditionally where you have to wait for someone to make a counter offer that matched your order, and that could take, sometimes an hour very quickly, sometimes it could take multiple days, even upwards of a few months. Now it will go through instantly. So now, for the first time after this is launched, I think actually in the world, like it's pretty insane to think about even today, despite the fact that we've already built it. For the first time in the world, you'll be able to directly buy and sell real estate, in the United States and possibly in the future internationally as well. But you're able to directly buy ownership in real estate, not a fund or anything like that, but directly into the house with the same experience as you would trading stocks. And that's, I'm pretty sure, never existed before. And we're really excited to see how our users and just overall the market reacts to this.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. It does make me think about like taxes and all the, forms and documentations at the end of the year. What would that look like if we're kind of buying and trading in this pool, and then will we receive a lot of documents at the end of the year?
It's the same, it's you're basically just buying and selling real estate, but with higher frequency. So it's taxed the same way that buying and selling real estate is taxed. So standard capital gains, short term, long term, depending on the period you've held your ownership in. But again, one of the benefits of Lofty and us trying to make the process more efficient and easier for people is we handle all the taxes for you. So we just just like on Robinhood, like at the end of the year, we just give
Yep.
you a form and you just have to file that yourself. But everything is tracked and documented for you.
Excellent. That's great. So think about security. So one of the comments we've seen that one of our viewers want is like the incident with my algo happened earlier this year. It got hacked, right? And the
Mhm.
scenario is that people had tokens in their wallet or NFTs that represent their properties. What happens if someone loses access to that wallet?
It is a temporary inconvenience. We actually have two sets of records. So again, we use the blockchain as a settlement layer, but we have our own database in the back end that records people's ownership as we understand, like this should be the rightful owner. So in the event that hacks like this are reported, they can be easily proven. So in that case, we default to the recording in our database. So we still recognize you despite you not having the tokens anymore as the owners of that property. And so all rental income that is due to you is directed to your account, not to whoever, the hacker that owns the tokens. Um, and then on top of that, it's pretty useless, for people to try to hack Lofty users because again, this mechanism is in place. And if you want to then, use the tokens and trade on our marketplace, you have to KYC, which would not be smart for a hacker, right? So we
No,
know
not at
which
all.
wallet you have to link that wallet that you actually own the tokens in to our platform, to your identity. So that's not very smart. So they'll never do that. And then basically those two tokens become useless for them. And then the legal way this all works is that, these are just ownership in a DAO, in a legal DAO entity. They're actually called DAO LLCs formed in the state of Wyoming. And so as part of the operating agreement that you're all members of, people can vote and just reissue tokens. So like it's inconvenient, but essentially these people haven't actually lost money. There's a way to recover all of their principal back and for them to trade on the platform again.
So I'm hearing essentially two proofs of that, like you're owning this property. Y'all database plus the blockchain definitely makes sense. Speaking of regulation, how have y'all experience been just, in the United States dealing with crypto regulation, and like what's that process been like building your business out?
Yeah, it's definitely been really difficult to navigate. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And we've had run-ins with regulators already. Like, they definitely know about us, and we've already, had many back and forths with a variety of regulators. But we're very adamant that this is an important and useful technology to Americans, and we all live in the US. The team is based in the US, the company is formed in the US. So we want to build here in the United States. And the best we can do is basically look at the current laws as they're written and as they exist and try our best to comply and follow those, which we
Mhm.
do. Um, we have an astonishing legal team, not in-house, external counsel, which we
Yep.
pay a lot of money for, but they're top tier. And we go over our business model with them. We show them what we do, what we don't do, what we want to do, and what we don't want to do. And we crafted a platform specifically around existing regulations and laws, and we're not violating any of them. And the things that we do need to register for, like federally, we're registered with FinCEN as a money transfer. We KYC, we have an internal AML policy, like we handle all of that stuff. So
Mhm.
things that are like, very black and white, we always follow. And then as far as, like securities regulations, things like that, again, based on the laws as they exist and based on what we do, our argument, and we have a legal opinion as well, and the argument of our lawyers is that these are not securities, as how securities are currently defined. But despite that, the way regulations work is not so black and white, especially when it comes to securities law. A regulator can still come after you and still like sue you at any
Mhm.
point in time. I mean, look at Coinbase. They're probably the most compliant, and like
Yes.
they're a public company in the United States, right? And so they're very compliant. They're very regulated. They clearly do things above board, but they still get sued. Same thing with Kraken. Like so,
Yep.
I just want people to make that distinction. You can it's really tough building in the US because you can do everything right and then still get sued because the regulator either doesn't understand the business model or they just have some agenda on the side.
Yep.
And for the most part, most regulators we dealt with are actually quite reasonable. But it is a little interesting in that some of them seems to not be fully aware of their own laws that their agency is supposed to enforce, because they'll come and they'll say, oh well, we think you're doing X, Y, and Z, and then we're just like, well, actually we're not doing any of these things you think we're doing, and we can prove it. And like, look at your own laws as it's written. It specifically says that this is exempt from securities registration, and then they're like, oh, okay. And then they come back and they're like, they'll never tell you that you're okay, but they just kind of then leave you alone after that interaction. And then
Mhm.
we get to come back and be like, okay, that clearly that argument works, and we can be pretty confident moving forward. But there's been a couple instances of that. But it's just interesting. It's like, you would imagine they would do more research and kind of really understand things before they make any accusations or come after you, but that's apparently not the case.
Yeah, we keep seeing that, especially in crypto. And then with those
Yes.
regulators, I'm always wondering. So they're always like, let's sue somebody and just try to get some money. That's what it really seems like over there.
I try to think the best of people, and so I'm just an optimist by like just by nature, and so I try not to think like that. But more and more, it's starting to seem like that is in fact the case. One of the
Yes.
things that I've been most shocked by, and I'm still shocked that this is actually legal, is that regulators have their own court. So when you're getting
Oh,
sued, you're not actually being sued in an actual court under like the U.S. judiciary system, where it's like, it has its flaws, but for the most part, it's pretty fair. Like you get a
yeah.
independent judge that's supposed to be unbiased. Like maybe there's a jury, things like that. You think that's what's happening, but that's actually not what's happening. So when regulators first sue you, they have their own administrative court. So basically, for example, like the SEC, within the SEC, they have their own court. and the people that work in that court, including the quote unquote judge,
I'm
like
like, oh,
works for the SEC. And they're supposed to have
oh,
this administrative wall, which is they're not supposed to share information. But let's be honest, like, do you really think they're unbiased? And that's the court you get sued in first. And then is it a surprise that like a lot of companies lose in that court, or like they choose to settle? Like there's so many companies that just end up paying the fine and settle because they realize when they talk to their lawyers and stuff, like, what is my probability of winning in this sort of like fake court system that isn't really a court? And the answer is like next to zero. And
I mean,
so
look
it's
at
like, well, if
Binance.
that's the case, like, why wouldn't you
whoa,
settle, right? So that's something I think the vast majority of people don't realize. If it was an actual court, like the open court that we are all used to, I think a lot of companies would actually fight it out in the courts because they have good arguments. Like, hey, we have data, we have evidence, like we don't do this, this is not a security, they would fight it out. But when they come after you and they're like, either settle for a lot less money or you go through our administrative court, which you're almost guaranteed to lose, and then the fine will be even bigger. What do you think those
yep.
companies will opt to do? So that's kind of hopefully explains a lot of the weird things people see in the news.
Great explanation. I did not know that. And then it does, you same here. I want to think most people are genuine and kind, but then when I do look at Gary Gensler and the rest of them, I'm like, something's going on. Is definitely money related, and they want as much as they can get. It's very interesting. Critical change. You got something?
I was just going to say my son is starting to wake up a little bit, but I was just want to say if you could touch on what do you think the future of tokenized real estate will look like as regulation gets clear and as we continue to move forward in the space?
Yeah, I think you're going to have, unless, look, again, Congress could change the laws and regulators could issue new guidance. But as things stands, I think there will be likely two industries as it currently exists, right? So one is again this sort of peer-to-peer industry transactions, where it's not really regulated, where it actually represents the bulk of real estate volume, right? Like when people buy houses, they just buy from other people, like there's no regulator involved. And let's be honest, like nobody buys a house without thinking of it as an investment, right? Like if I told you, like, yeah, you get to live in this house, but you're guaranteed to sell it for less 30 years later, would you buy this house? Most people would say no.
No.
People's homes are their usually biggest investment and sort of like their biggest asset as they retire, right? And so that industry, in my opinion, unless they change the rules and laws around it, is always going to stay unregulated in that regards. And that's the industry that we want to grow in and we want to build in. As for this other sort of industry, like right now, there's REITs, there's funds, right? Like you can invest in someone else's real estate fund. They go out, do a lot of the work, flip houses or things like that, syndications,
Yep.
like new real estate developments, private equity deals, things like that. Those type of real estate related stuff. As they stand today, they're securities, but I believe that tokenization unlocks a lot of efficiencies that would be in a lot of these, people's interest to sort of adopt. So I foresee in the future there's going to be a second market that mimics the existing regulated ones, where they're securities, but they're just tokenized securities, and it allows people to passively invest with fund managers in private equity deals and things like that. So you're going to kind of have this sort of bifurcation, two sides of the real estate market, unless they decide to change and make everything a security or make nothing a security, which I don't think either case is likely to happen.
Yeah, it's a lot of we have a lot of waiting and seeing. We'll see, but at the same time, businesses have to move forward and keep working until the regulators call knocking on that door. So very interesting. Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience about Lofty AI or what y'all got coming next, or anything that we haven't covered?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. And look, Lofty is very specific. It's meant to make traditional real estate investing very accessible to people. But I'll actually be honest, like just because it's accessible, it doesn't mean it's a good fit for everyone, right? Like if you're someone that's looking to moon or like you want 500% returns in a
Not here.
month, like real estate, like this is real estate. It's not funny tokens. It's not virtual land or anything like that in the metaverse. Like they mimic actual real estate performance, and you're just unfortunately not going to get that type of
Mhm.
returns if that's your expectation. So if that's what you want, it's probably not a good fit for you. And then alternatively, if you want to invest passively and do zero work, like REITs are probably your best bet, or
Yeah.
invest in someone's passive fund. On Lofty, it's a lot easier, meaning that you don't have to pick up the phone call at like 3 a.m. from the tenant that the pipes are,
Sure.
leaking or something like that. And you don't have to physically take a sledgehammer to go like repair a drywall or like, do any like renovations in that regards. But you're responsible for making all the management decisions with your investment. Like Lofty, we will not make any decisions for you or on your behalf. So if you're just decide like, hey, I don't care and I'm going to be passive and I'm not going to make any decisions, then the house just sits there and we don't make decisions for you. And you're likely going to lose money on that. And so
Uh,
Lofty is the best fit for people who, want to be in control, but just don't want to do the physical labor, but they're happy to, sit in front of a computer and vote electronically.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I definitely voted early when I was in a few properties, and it was a fun experience for one to be able to really like participate. And again, like we said, the whole ethos of crypto of being decentralized. I think this platform and others that have this type of idea and strategy will definitely be beneficial for the society. And right now, when we're looking at 401ks and things of that nature, they are not being the best product for people. So it does make me think of another question. What is the process like when, or is a similar process if someone dies or want to pass this property or these tokens on to a family member? How would that process work?
Same as before.
Okay.
So, like imagine you had a house, right? Like the deed is under your name, and then, fortunately, if you pass away, and it's in your will or whatever the typical inheritance laws are for that state and jurisdiction, it just kind of goes according traditionally with the laws there. So in this case, it's no different. Like you legally own these assets. Ideally, it'd be easier if you shared, like,
Mhm.
like maybe you have your recovery wallet recovery keys as part of your will or something that like your
Makes
lawyer
sense.
manages for you or something like that. So that would be the easiest way. But like worst case scenario, the funds can still be recovered and like you can go through the traditional legal system. And if someone approaches us, it's like, hey, the court has decided like these are my parents' assets, they're now being passed to me. We would be able to help you get that process sorted out.
Excellent. I love it. So let's close this show out. You just one more time want to tell people where to find your platform or any social sites before we go?
Sure. Yeah, you can find us on Twitter at lofty underscore AI. And then you can also find us on our website at www.lofty.ai.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So everyone, we'll see you next week.